Hello to everybody who's listening to this. I presume most of you are student interpreters, but not all. And what I'm going to be saying is mainly addressed to student interpreters, but I think any person coming out of a university will find it very useful. So, what I wanted to say to you was your training as interpreters, or your training to graduate, the lessons will be the same. And you think that technique is everything, and you're not wrong. But there's more than everything. Technique is not enough. You have to have the technique to get through our recruitment test, for example, or our accreditation test, but the technique in itself is not enough. You need lots of other skills too. You need lots more knowledge as well. I think one of the things that people misunderstand is that you practice your consecutive, you practice your simultaneous, and that's it. Well, I'm afraid there's a lot of background things to be doing as well. It really is a full-time job. It's not just when you're in the booth, you're doing it all the time. And that applies from now. So, what does an employer look for? Well, first of all, if you're an interpreter, of course, the technique I've mentioned, but also much more than that. As I said, one is communication. In other words, you're making a speech. You're making the speech. You are becoming the speaker. And that changes a lot. First of all, who are you? Who is the speaker? Who you are determines how you speak to a very large extent. You will not use the same form of address or the same form of language if you are a finance minister, a dustman, an agricultural expert, an IT expert, all sorts of things like that. So the first point I want to make is register. You need to analyze. A Shakespearean actor does not use the same script or the same turn of phrase as somebody in the very latest neo-modernist play. And there's a good reason for it. So not only foreign languages, but also your own language has lots of variations, lots of variants, and you will need to know how to use them. It's a bit like a musical instrument. You don't just play one string. It may be your favorite string, but there's lots of other strings and you have to play those too. So that's the first point. You need to know how to use your mother tongue, just like a musician uses his instrument. All sorts of different registers, all sorts of different situations, because at least in most people's experience of interpreting, you won't have a single client. It won't be a monochord performance. You will have to adjust, adapt, and assimilate what your client is saying and who you're saying it to as well. This is nothing new. This is, I think Aristotle described this several thousand years ago, 2,000 and something years ago. Know your audience. You also have to know your speaker, in the case of an interpreter, because he's an intermediary. But this also applies to everybody else too. What else? Well, of course, consecutive is the foundation of interpretation. And why is it the foundation of interpretation? This is a question we're often asked. We don't do very much consecutive. That's true. Most of it is simultaneous. And yet, very frequently, you will find that consecutive is the first test that you will have to sit, and also in many cases it is eliminatory. And that is why, that is because as a consecutive interpreter, you know very well where the speaker wants to be at the end of his speech and the route he's taken to be there. And you must follow that route. In other words, you have to show that you've analyzed the intention of the speaker, the philosophy and the reasoning of the speaker, and you come to the same conclusion as the speaker. In simultaneous, it's all too easy to get it wrong, but to think you've done a really good job, because you don't know where you're going. You're following the speaker very closely. In consecutive, you have the advance notice of where the speaker intends to be, of his final destination, and of the route he's taking, and you must show that you can analyze that and follow the same route to arrive at the same conclusion. Logical, really. Having said that, there is also a practical use for consecutive as well. It is done. In fact, the more languages we have, the more useful consecutive is. A paradox, but only the first of many. Simultaneous is what we do most of. But there too, you have to be very careful. Don't practice on your own. Always have somebody listening to you. You never work in a vacuum. You always work for an audience. So make sure you have an audience and you do your best. And thirdly, communication. Don't just listen to what he says, the speaker. Listen also to how it's being done, how he engages with the audience, the tone. If Khrushchev in the United Nations was banging his shoe on the table out of sheer rage and frustration, and you say, I'm not sure that I entirely subscribe to that point of view, Chairman, maybe the message will not exactly be the same, and maybe your client will take his headphones off and give up in disgust. Make sure it doesn't happen. Thank you.